Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is Charlie here with the Chasing Dreams podcast, episode 25. Justin, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, brother. How you doing today?
I'm cold. That's for one. But I
Yeah.
guess you know what? I don't know if I've told this story on air before, but at one point in time, I was at the gym and a friend of mine who I see there very frequently, saw there very frequently, I should say, considering gyms are closed. Um, he would always ask me how it was going. And I always told him, the one time I mentioned to him, I said, well, I'm alive. And then I paused for a moment and I had like this kind of little epiphany. And I said to myself, a lot of people didn't get that opportunity this morning to wake up alive. So I know that it's just kind of like a humorous thing that you say in passing, but it has some meaning behind it. And I thought, you know what, if I'm alive and I have my health and I'm able to go to the gym, then it means a lot. So I shouldn't really be complaining about the cold right now.
That's really the reason why I say the things I say, like fantastic or I'm awesome or I'm living the dream, because really we are.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's nice to put a powerful adjective there instead of just saying I'm doing well or I'm good or whatever. I think it's a little bit more impactful.
I
All
agree.
right, dude. So we have a fantastic guest with us for this episode. Generally, when we give the background info on people, we kind of divulge head to toe. Like we talk about, where they came from briefly, what they're doing right now. And I told you before we started recording, Justin, that I wanted to introduce our guest very vaguely because there were so many talking points that we're going to hit on throughout this interview. It's pretty amazing to see all the obstacles that our guest has overcome um, over the course of her life. And I also wanted to make sure that we preemptively state that this is going to be a two-part episode because there's been
Yes.
some of the guests in the past where, you and I have said off air afterwards, like, oh man, we should have covered this. And there are a couple other things that we could have, gotten question wise in, but with her, it was like, blatantly obvious from the get-go that we were going to have way too much to talk about. So we're going to have to find a decent stopping point and kind of cut it there. And then we'll revisit with her hopefully next week.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great idea.
Okay. So our guest, ladies and gentlemen, her name is Shannon Knorr. So Shannon, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, like I said, in previous episodes, we always give this rundown of who you are and what you do and all those things. But number one, your background is way too complex to even start to get into for an introduction. And then not only that, but even what you're doing right now, because I feel like you're kind of immersed in three full-time jobs, essentially, not counting being a mother, which I should extend a happy early Mother's Day to you, too.
Thank you.
All right. So to start off, you and I met 2 years ago, I believe.
About a year and a half ago, probably.
Okay, yeah, I guess it was 2 Arnolds ago. So not 2 calendar years, but not this past Arnold Classic, which was canceled. You and I both worked the Redcon booth together.
Yep.
Formed a good friendship. And then now I kind of reached out to you to be on the podcast. And I knew that you had always said that you had a pretty unique story as far as how everything from your childhood progressed up through adulthood now. And I never really kind of delved into the intricacies there. I just kind of thought, oh, maybe she's overcome the loss of family members or whatever. But when you told me the full thing, it pretty much blew me away. And
Yeah.
I don't even know all the full details. And you kind of told us before, say, hey, I'm an open book. Feel free to ask whatever questions you want, which Justin and I got real excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you guys want to ask, feel free. I am definitely an open book.
Okay, so Miss Book, open your pages and tell us, who are you? What are you doing right now? Just kind of take us into who Shannon Knorr is.
Okay, so I'll start off by saying I am a mom because I think that's probably my most important job that I have. I have 2 little girls, and I'm also a nurse. I do quite a bit of baking, and I am also a bikini and figure competitor, but have primarily been focusing on the bikini side of it for the last little under a year.
Okay, so I got to give you some self-promotion here because you're kind of approaching it with humility. You said that I think your exact words were you enjoy baking. Well, I think enjoy baking is an understatement considering you're the founder and owner of your own small business.
Yes.
So you have a baking business, which we'll touch on that later.
Yep,
And then as far as the competitive realm, you're also a natural pro, correct?
that is correct. I'm a bikini pro with the WNBF.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome.
So that I
That's
don't even know
awesome.
what direction to go with this. There's so many things to start off with. So I think that you said that your struggles and your overcoming obstacles kind of started very early, like high school ish. So can you
Yep,
kind of take us back to like how Shannon was in high school and kind of how that all transgressed?
absolutely. So high school, I was an athlete. So fitness and being athletic has always been a big part of my life. I primarily played softball and field hockey. And eventually, when I was a freshman, I actually developed an eating disorder. I was anorexic and also bulimic. And
Can
usually
you
when I
I'm
say
sorry to
that,
interrupt. I have to interrupt real quick just because
yeah,
if I don't, I'm sure there's people that are at home wondering the same thing. I, for one, admittedly so, am kind of ignorant when it comes to the specificity of eating disorders. I know there's differences to be able to discern between bulimia and anorexia.
hmm,
Would you be able to provide some insights on what the difference between those two is and how you had both of them?
absolutely. Yeah, I get that question a lot because people that know vaguely that they're different are like, well, how can you have both?
Hmm.
So, anorexia essentially is classified by under eating, not eating, essentially starving yourself. Whereas bulimia is classified as you eat and then you force yourself to throw up after you eat. And it typically is more you'll binge, so you'll eat tons and tons of calories or huge meals, and then you'll make yourself throw up or purge, is what they call it, afterwards. But you can just even eat a regular meal and then make yourself throw up as well. So that's really the big difference between them is anorexia is essentially starving yourself and bulimia is making yourself throw up after you've eaten.
See, I was familiar
And
with the self-induced vomiting portion of bulimia, but
yep, and
I wasn't
generally
sure the
bulimics
overlap.
are a normal weight too.
Okay.
They're not typically, they can be, but they're not typically underweight like you would see in anorexia.
Hmm. So
Right.
you said that this started your freshman year. Uh,
It did.
I know it's probably difficult to like psychoanalyze, but maybe being an adult now and looking back in hindsight, why do you think that this all started? Was it like a self-image issue? Because like Justin and I have talked on previous episodes with, different guests and even amongst ourselves, how, the fitness industry is kind of driven by everybody having at least to some degree a self-image issue.
Hmm. I think there's a few things. So there has been some research that has shown that eating disorders can be partially genetic, coming from family histories, not necessarily that have eating disorders, but that have some type of abusive, drug related, alcohol related, any type of addiction. So it can stem from that. And there is a long line of drug and alcohol addiction in my father's side of the family. So that could potentially be part of it. I think the other part of it is definitely self image and self esteem or lack thereof, I should say. And then I do think another part of it is control. I think as a teenager, I felt like I didn't have a whole lot of control over my life or my choices or what I was doing. And food and what I ate was something that I could control. So I think I latched onto that. And then it basically for me, speaking from my experiences, did become an addiction,
Mhm.
basically, much like you would see in alcoholism or drug abuse. It was something that I had to do. It wasn't something that I had control of anymore. I had to do it.
Yeah.
And you said that
I
this got to the point where it was like hospitalization, right?
It was. So initially, it kind of started. I was very good at hiding it at first. My dad was actually the first person to recognize it. And he had kind of brought it up to my mom about, she seems like she's really lost a lot of weight. And my mom was like, no, she's fine. So at some point, they ended up bringing me to my pediatrician at the time. And over the course of a couple of months, I had lost over 20 pounds.
Wow.
I wasn't significantly underweight at that time, but I had lost a significant amount of weight. So it was something they were keeping an eye on. And initially it started as I was being admitted into like my local hospital, just into like the pediatric facility, essentially really just to rehydrate me more than anything else. And then I did, when I was a sophomore, I did get admitted to a more long-term care facility in Princeton, New Jersey. I was there for about a year on and off, and we can go into a little more detail about why that was on and off. But after about a year of being there, they decided that there wasn't anything more that they could do for me, and I needed even more help than they were able to provide. So I was transferred down to a long-term care facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Wow. So you
Wow.
were obviously, 1,000 miles from your family at that point then.
I was a very long way from my family, and it was really hard to be that far away from them. And I know it was really affecting, and in this entire situation, as much as I can say, it was affecting me, it really, truly, significantly affected my family. It was something that was really difficult for them. And eventually, when I did down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, transfer to an outpatient basis, I was still there every single day, all day. I just didn't sleep there. But thankfully, I have a wonderful family. They've always been very supportive of me. And my dad took several months off of work, rented an apartment down in Tulsa, and he stayed with me out there until I came home.
Wow. There's a lot to delve into and kind of digest here, no pun intended.
Yes.
Yeah, it's weird. I can actually relate to the addiction part with that, but just not in the same sense.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's, I think when I try and explain it to people that it is similar to an addiction. So for me, like I said, it was something that I had to do. Like it was my life, and it was something that I had to do. Or if I didn't, honestly, I remember the anxiety that I would feel was so overwhelming. And I remember my mom, and I do remember this day. It was the day that I was set to fly down to Oklahoma. I remember getting up, had breakfast with my family, and then my mom said, she's like, I couldn't find you anywhere. And we had so I lived kind of in like the boonies, like out in the woods, like really small town. And we had these gardens that were like out in the back of our house that were kind of private. And she said that she very distinctively remembers coming out and seeing me there, making myself throw up. And she said, I started crying, and I said, what are you doing? And she said, you looked at me with these sad eyes. And I apparently said to her, I can't help it. And so for her, that's something that she distinctly remembers. And I do remember it too, but probably not quite as vividly as she does. But so that's like the addiction part of it. Like for me, it was something I had to do. So that's where my anorexia and bulimia was. I would starve myself. If I did eat, then I would make myself throw up.
It's very unfortunate, but myself personally, I've lost friends to drug overdoses, which
Yeah.
generally you would assume that like that's not the people that I try to associate with, but a lot of them kept it hidden, like yourself.
Yep.
And I remember, speaking to the one who was in and out of rehab for several years before he finally OD'd. And he would always say that it was like an indescribable feeling, and that he wouldn't have to
Hmm.
do the drugs in order to get high. It was just to maintain like normalcy, because he would feel so sick and horrible going through withdrawal, and it was literally completely out of his control. There was not like a question of willpower or anything like that. He just
Yeah.
absolutely had to do it.
Yes. And that is something that I can relate to 100%, as far as my eating disorder, when it was something that I just had to do. It was my normalcy. It was, and like I said, the anxiety that I would feel if I couldn't do it for some reason, or, I mean, it was overwhelming.
It's pretty wild, because Justin and I have talked on, we did like a full I guess a quasi interview with Justin, where he kind of opened up to everybody about like his struggles with
Yeah.
his weight loss, and kind of, because we've always talked about the good things with his weight loss, and then we kind of
Mhm.
went into like the bad things, like where it started, where he needed to have a change.
Yep.
And he and I both talked about like the mental aspect of like different places that we've been, and trying to overcome those things. But like, it's not, again, it's not a question of willpower or fortitude. It's like some deep rooted neurological, like, I must do this or I can't control this. And once you get
Absolutely.
deeper and deeper into that spiral, I mean, it's something that just it completely overcomes your entire life, I think.
It really
Yeah,
does.
it does. It does. That's what I mean. Like I can relate. I can't relate to the not eating part, but I can relate to being addicted to food on
Yeah.
my end, and like also like the effects. How you said the effects on your family. You
The
know.
effect, and that is something for me that I, even to this day, feel very guilty about, and how it affected my family, both financially, but also emotionally. So when, because this was many years ago, now that I'm in my 30s, that this all occurred, insurance at that time did not recognize eating disorders under mental health. So insurance didn't cover the majority
Oh,
of
your care.
my treatment. So my family, fronted the majority of the financial bills, which we all know healthcare is not cheap.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, but also emotionally, it really affected them. It was really difficult for them, to see their daughter basically dying before their
Right.
eyes, and them not being able to do anything about it.
Now,
Yeah, I understand that.
I'm sorry, Justin.
I just said I understand that.
Did you like were you cognizant of the fact that you had some deep rooted psychological problems that were like manifesting themselves within an eating disorder? I mean, I'm sure obviously when you went to Oklahoma, it was to the point where you had been in and out of different like short-term care facilities and such. So obviously you're aware of it then, but like leading up to that, like what was your mindset? Like, were you in denial? Like, were you very clear and were actively trying to hide it, or were you subconsciously trying to hide it? Like, what was it like when this all first started?
I think initially when it started, it was more of a, this is something I have control over. This is, I was aware somewhat of what I was doing, but in a bit of a denial, at some point as it progressed, as to what I was really doing. As I began to lose weight, it was like it was never enough. I was never going to be, looking back, I was never going to be satisfied with my weight until basically I really honestly was dead. And I was okay with that, at that point, because it was the only way that I could feel any type of confidence in myself and my body image. So now another thing that goes along with eating disorders, and even just men and women in general. I will probably say more so for women. It's called body dysmorphia, and it's where you don't see your body the way other people see it. So I had body dysmorphia. When I was finally admitted to the hospital, I weighed about 65 pounds.
At how tall?
I'm 5'4".
Holy
My
cow.
God.
I mean, 65 pounds, regardless of how tall you are. That's insane.
Yeah, I was skin and bones. I was very, very sick. I had a leaky heart valve, so I had done some damage to my body. But I did not see that. I saw this fat teenage girl who
Now,
had
obviously,
to lose more weight.
you have people telling you like things to the contrary, and they're telling you, I'm sure, all the time, like, you're too skinny, like you look so thin. Like, do you think that these people are just telling you this just to try to like make you feel better, or did you think they were crazy? Like, what was your thought behind
I,
people constantly telling you that you look too skinny?
I think that I've just always thought that people were just saying those things. They were lying, or they were saying them, to make you feel better about yourself. Because I didn't see it and I didn't feel it.
That's unreal.
Jeez.
Yeah, I don't even know how to like continue with this. Can you
It's
give me?
sad.
It's very sad. Yeah, and I'm sure that there's probably people out there listening right now that have gone through similar experiences. And if not similar experiences, I'm sure that you can kind of take the message that, Shannon, that you're sharing and kind of relay it to your own situation. Like Justin talked about how, he had an unhealthy addiction to food. It wasn't the lack of food, it was the opposite, the overabundance of food. And like
Right.
something that I can kind of relate to in a sense is mine was an unfortunate result of multiple head traumas because of sports. And like when I was in high school, I developed very severe clinical like OCD. And
Hmm.
I look back and it was like super easy to kind of, in retrospect, kind of like pick apart and see why I did everything that I did. And it was all about control, because I felt like with my anxiety and stuff, I didn't have control over anything. So I wanted to make sure that everything that I could control was perfect. So like my
Right.
obsessive compulsive disorder got completely out of control. And it's like you alluded to before, it's not something that you can just like stop doing. Like you have to. And when people say, well, why do you have to do this? Like, why do you have to color code and organize and dust your room 30 times a day? Or why do you
Right.
have to make sure the house is locked 5 times? Or why do you have to keep making yourself throw up in the garden? It's something that you can't even begin to explain why, because you don't know why. You don't necessarily feel why. It's just almost like you're on autopilot and there's someone that's like not you controlling your actions. It's so hard to describe.
Yeah, and unless you can relate to that in some sense, it is something that's very difficult for people to understand.
What was it like when you went to, well, I guess give us both of them. Give us, what was it like in the short-term care facilities, and then ultimately when you found yourself in Oklahoma, what was life like there?
So initially, like I said, I started out in Princeton, New Jersey, and they had a small eating disorder unit within the hospital itself. It wasn't meant to be a long-term care facility, but they would keep you there for as long as they needed to. Generally, it would be typically for shorter periods of time. Some people stayed a couple weeks, some people stayed a couple months. It really depended on your situation. I would typically be there for a few months at a time. And again, my family, like I said, they were amazing. Families could come and visit every weekend. And depending on how your week went, you could get a pass to go outside of the hospital and locally around with your family. You could even go out to eat with them. So that was kind of like a reward for like having a good week, doing what you were supposed to do as far as the program went. And God bless my family. I don't remember them not coming even one weekend. They were always there, whether I was able to go out on a pass with them or not. If I wasn't able to go out, they stayed there with me inside the unit, and we spent time together. But so anyway, typically I would be there for a couple months at a time. I would progress and from what they thought. Again, I was a little bit manipulative with some things that they didn't initially know about. But I would be doing well enough that they would give me like 2 or 3 days to go home and see how I did at home to see if, maybe I could transition to a normal home life and not have to be there anymore. And we tried that multiple times, and every single time within a few days, I would come back and be a complete disaster. I would have lost anywhere from 5 to 15 pounds in that short period of time. Because I would go back to starving myself, making myself throw up. I'd take laxatives, like anything I could to get my weight back down. So at that point, after almost a year of kind of being there for the majority of the time with a little bit of time at home, they decided that I needed something more long term, and it's called a residential unit. So I ended up going down to Tulsa, Oklahoma for their program. And I was there for about almost another whole year between being an inpatient and then, like I had spoken of earlier, transitioning to more of an outpatient basis where I lived off campus outside of the hospital with my dad, who I said came and rented an apartment there. But I would still spend all day at the hospital doing their programming. So it was kind of, and I remember technically I was not actually discharged from there. I had looked at my dad, who I was living in the apartment with, and I said, I want to go home. I'm not going back, and I want to go home. And he was not happy. He didn't feel like I was ready to come home. He was scared, of course. And I actually, oddly enough, they told him that, I was 16 and they couldn't force me to stay there. And if I wanted to not be there, then I didn't have to be there. There was nothing that they could do. There was nothing he could do. So we did end up going home per my choice, not because the facility said, you know what, you're well enough that you can go home. But oddly enough, I came home on January 1st. So on a brand new year was the day that I finally came home from the hospital permanently.
One thing Justin and I talk a lot about is like failure and perceived failure.
Yeah.
What was your mentality going into this? Number one, did you like look at it as, okay, I'm going to actively use this to get better? Or did you view it as, this is something that I have to do. I'm going to try to get away with as much as I can and just get out of here. And then number two is, after you didn't really, I guess, in your estimation, successfully complete the program or anything, and you worked your way back home, did you view that as a success? Like, yes, I'm finally back home. I don't have to deal with that stuff anymore. Or is it more of like a failure sense because, I just let everybody down because I didn't complete it and I didn't see the way it was supposed to be done?
So I would say, to answer your question of how I felt at the time when I was around the time I was first hospitalized, it wasn't something I went into wanting to get better. It was something that I was going to do the bare minimum of what I had to do. And if I could manipulate to make them think I was doing it when I really wasn't, then I was going to do that. basically just to appease them so I could get home and start actively using my eating disorder more again. So
Basically,
like I said, you can only do so much in the hospital. They really were very good at keeping an eye on you. You would be weighed on a scale every morning. You would face away from the scale because you were not allowed to see what your weight was. I would hide like shampoo bottles, like pretty much anything I could find. I would hide them in like my underwear or what have you to make it look like on the scale I weighed more than I actually did.
Wow.
Which I know
wow.
sounds completely crazy. Looking back, I'm like, wow, that was like really insane. But again, I was gonna try and get away with doing as little as possible, but make them think that I was progressing and doing what I was supposed to do, in order to get home and be able to start using my eating disorder again.
Wow.
And then to answer your question on like what it felt like coming home, I think at that point I didn't view it as a failure. I don't know that I viewed it as a success really either. I think I really just got to a point where I was ready to be home with my family. I felt like I had gotten to a point where was I still struggling? 100% with eating disorders. It is something that I will struggle with for the rest of my life to some extent. It's something that never truly goes away. Much like with drug addiction, alcohol abuse, what have you, there are a lot of relapses, and sometimes it can be 10, 20 years down the road. Like, it's just something you always have to be aware of and that you're always trying to deal with to some extent. But I just got to a point where I didn't want to live in the hospital anymore. I didn't want to live away from my family. And I just felt like I was ready to go home. I at least needed to try and go home and be able to live a life outside of the hospital.
I guess that's very insightful, to underplay it. I mean, I can't really think of anything to express it better than that. I mean, I never, because again, being somewhat ignorant to the topic of eating disorders. I mean, I knew the basics, but like I had no idea kind of what went on at these facilities, and I didn't even know there was like a difference between like stages. Like you go to a short-term care facility, and then you go to what did you call it? A residency? A
They
resident
called it a residential unit.
residential unit?
Yep.
Yeah, that's wild. So like you're basically, I mean, what time did you come home? You said you were 16 at the time.
I was 16 at the time. Yep.
So you lost a half of your high school life, which is, irreplaceable time with your family, irreplaceable time with your friends and your community and all the things that go along with it. You lost that. And now you're coming back and released back into the high school wild at 16. So what was it like coming back to what we would call normal life?
It was definitely not an easy transition, and it was not at all what I expected it to be, quite honestly. So at both hospitals that I was at, they did, there was certain times of every day that were allotted to school. They had teachers there. They really did the best they could to communicate with whatever school you were attending to get homework so that you could work on that. Like, they really did a good job trying to keep you up with school while you weren't able to be there. Unfortunately for me, my school was not very good or cooperative about sending work. So when I did end up going back, I actually had to stay back a full year. So I was a year behind the class that I should have been in. So that was a difficult transition in and of itself, to go back and not be in classes with your friends anymore, not be not be where you're supposed to be. On top of that, I think we all know how brutal and mean kids can be.
Terrible.
And it's even worse now than it was when I was younger, I think. But I pretty much none of my friends, including my best friends that I had, would even acknowledge me. When I went back to school, I got called a lot of names. It was not a very welcoming or friendly environment. I felt very out of place. I felt very uncomfortable. I literally pretty much went back and had no friends. So at a certain point, I tried to stick it out for quite a while. But after talking to my family about it, at some point, we all, not that they wanted to agree to this, but we all kind of came to the collective decision that where I was at trying to recover, school was not the best environment for me to do that. And if I were to continue going to the school, this is how bad it was, that I probably would have relapsed and fallen very deeply back into my eating disorder. So at that time, I actually dropped out of high school.
Wow.
Entirely.
Yeah, kids. That's terrible. Kids are horrible. I can remember being in school and like we said, I've said it a couple of times already. I was like the exact opposite. I was the biggest kid in the room all the time, and I really was. You know what I mean? Like, so kids, they will find weakness in any sense to exploit, and I can just remember never wanting to go back there.
Yep.
Ever. And I wasn't even the most bullied kid in my class. You know what I mean? Like, so I hate the bullying in the sense of bullying because so many people are affected by it.
And like you said, it's like people, and they will pick apart anything that they can find.
And you see
kind
kids
of
all the
bring
time.
you down.
They live in hypocrisy too, because there's kids that I've seen it happen where it's kind of like, if you can't beat them, join them. So if I'm someone who gets bullied, and I'm afforded the opportunity to work with young kids every day. So I get to witness this, unfortunately, happen firsthand. If I get bullied every day, I am going to join the bullies and gang up on someone else too, because maybe that deflects on what they do for me. So you tend to have kids that, know how bad it hurts and know how traumatic it can be, but then they kind of in turn do it to other people because it's the only way they can do to get the pressure off of themselves.
Right. And
I turned to, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, so like my core group of best friends that I had since I had been very young, I think they weren't initially the ones who were bullying me, but because I was being bullied so much, I think probably that's why they pulled away and didn't want to be friends with me anymore, or felt they couldn't be, was because they felt they were going to be ridiculed for being friends with quote unquote the freak at the school. Now, mind you, there were other girls that had eating disorders at my school at the time, just none of them had gotten treatment for it. I mean, none of them were as sick as I was either, but looking back, I think that's why my best friends were no longer friends with me, was because they felt like they would be bullied if they were friends with me.
Now, so you drop out of high school,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably, to this point in time, initially when you're in rehab, you think that it possibly, can't come to a lower point than it has. And then lo and behold, of course it does. And now you're out of high school. So when you look at your life that's laid out before you and your future, what are your initial thoughts of what you're going to do for the rest of your life now?
So I've known since as long as I can remember, I had always wanted to be a nurse. I've always had a very nurturing side to me, a very empathetic side,
Caring.
where I just enjoy taking care of people. I enjoy helping people, giving back to people. That's who I am. That's what makes me happy. Um, so I was nervous when I first dropped out of high school. Like, is this something? And, I'm still trying to recover. I'm still struggling. It's still difficult and something I have to focus on a lot. Um, it's like your future, what you pictured your future to be, I felt was in question for me at that time. Like, is this even feasible anymore? Am I going to be able to have this life that I always pictured I would have?
So then,
Yeah, I
go ahead,
agree.
Justin.
It's funny that and I missed it whenever you said your in your intro, like who is Shannon. My wife's a nurse,
Okay.
so I know that, like the things you're saying. She says, like, she used to talk about them all the time, and when she decided to be a nurse, so it was cool because, like, she says the same exact stuff, like, constantly. I think it's a nurse thing. I don't think
It
it's
is.
just. It's like it's pretty cool.
I think you have to be a
It's a
very
good
strong
nurse
person.
thing, because there are nurses out there, unfortunately, who go into it because they feel like it's a secure job versus a job that they actually enjoy doing and want to do.
Right.
You see that a lot in different professions. Like, I see it in teaching too, where people will
Yep.
say, oh, like, I want to be a teacher because I enjoy kids. Well, enjoying kids is not enough of a reason to be a teacher. It's definitely a prerequisite. Like, you absolutely have to like kids and enjoy them, but that's not the only thing that you need to consider when going into teaching. So I think that, to be a nurse, it takes a very strong-willed person, and someone who's able to fight through different hardships. Because the one thing that I think about with nurses, and anybody in the medical profession for that matter, is how they can overcome the perception of failure. Like, when you lose a patient or someone dies on you, for me, that would be very traumatic and emotionally
Mhm.
disturbing. And to see nurses be able to, I don't want to say be desensitized to that, because they're certainly not, but to be able to understand that there's a bigger picture and there's more battles that you have to fight is truly remarkable. That someone can go through that day in and day out and continue to go back and work and fight through it. So I think that's a testament to your willpower and everything that you kind of endured as a teenager.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's something I knew I always wanted to do because I like taking care of people. I like making people feel better. And like I said, I am very empathetic. Um, I've, my personality is just very much that of a caregiver. I'm someone who likes to take care of people.
So let's continue and take this roller coaster that is your life and go
Yes,
kind of to the next climactic point here. So you told me that you ended up getting your GED so that way
I
you could go
did.
to college,
Yep.
and take us to college. What happens next?
Well, actually, initially I got into college after I got my GED, and I did not go right away. I ended up not too long after I got home from the hospital getting involved in a relationship with someone who was both physically and emotionally abusive. So initially, even though I got accepted into college, I did not go right away. I stayed home to be in this abusive relationship.
And obviously you're at a high susceptibility, especially from the emotional standpoint, because you already are a bit vulnerable mentally with the obvious eating disorder and just being
Mhm.
fresh out of your care. So now when you transition back again into normal life for a couple years, it's probably pretty easy to find yourself being very susceptible to things like that when you're just looking for some semblance of comfort that you haven't had.
Yes. And, in abusive relationships too, the abusers are also very manipulative. So I was already clearly from my eating disorder, had very low self confidence, very low self-esteem. And he always reiterated that to me, essentially, of how I was worthless and he was the only person in the world who was ever going to love me. So I stayed with him for quite a long time, considering everything that I endured through the relationship with him. The way it did end was I did eventually, I had filed multiple, I had gone to the police multiple times, but would never follow through. And finally, I did end up actually following through with a complaint. And he did go to jail actually for quite some time.
Now, was that like a sense of empowerment at that time for you to know that you finally did something about it? Because I see that, oftentimes when people get caught in these abusive relationships, because for whatever reason, that's always been something. I use this term very cautiously, but I want to say that it fascinates me because I never understood it. And when I was younger, and I would always think, how could somebody get caught into these relationships and then continue to stay in them? And it seems like the common theme is if you tell somebody something long enough, they begin to believe it. And
Yep.
that a lot of times in these abusive relationships, you know, um, the individual that's being abused truly thinks that the abuser is, like you said, the only person that will ever love them. And there's no other option. So, yeah, this is less than ideal, but it's the only option I have. So I have to stay with this person.
100%. And I think you have to have some type of low self-esteem to begin with at some point, to even allow that one single time, let alone continuous. But yeah, it's something like I believed deep down that he was right. He was the only person who was ever going to love me. And this was the best that I deserved. I didn't deserve anything more than what he was giving me. And and he made me believe that it was my fault every time he would be physically abusive. Like if I hadn't done this, or if I had done this better or differently, then he wouldn't have had to do that. They make you believe that it's your fault that they're doing that to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it also, the repeated bout effect of hearing negative things, playing into the permanent psyche. I think that it
Hmm.
also works on the positive end too, because like Justin, I got to use you as an example here for this. Like Justin is probably like he's the eternal optimist. Like the glass is, always half full. And
Yep.
obviously there's times when that that you hit your peaks and then ultimately your valleys too. But I feel like his peak is higher than most and more consistent than most. And I feel like Justin, like you always talk about the power of positivity and always remaining in a good
Yeah.
mood. And I feel like if you do that often enough and long enough and frequent enough, that it's going to kind of manifest itself in your life and things will start to go your way.
It like
Yeah.
almost becomes like your buying power to get what you want.
Hmm.
Yeah.
When you tell yourself what you are, and if what you are is, if you tell yourself that you're good long enough and strong enough, you'll believe it. But it works on the opposite. I used to do both sides, and I used to tell myself how bad I was, or how fat I was, or how stupid I was, but et cetera, et cetera. And it sucks.
Yeah. And, I think too, it's almost like, and I know some people don't believe this, but like along those same lines, like the law of attraction, what you feel like you deserve, or your outlook on life or what have you, whatever that is what you're going to get back in return. Um, if you feel like you're worthless, then you're going to attract, or you're a negative person, you're going to attract that same negativity in the people that you surround yourself with. And I think it becomes this vicious cycle that, you're
Yes.
negative, so you attracted those negative people, and because they're negative, it just becomes this vicious cycle. Whereas with positivity, it's the same way. If you are positive, if you, like you said, if you tell yourself something enough times, eventually you're going to believe it. It's what you're going to attract, and it's essentially what you're going to accept in your life. You're either going to accept the positive people, or you're going to accept that negativity. And I just think it comes down to, at some point, what you're willing to accept.
And Justin,
As
that's kind of, for Justin and I, that's really what kind of spearheaded our friendship was,
Yes.
because we both started training. I mean, I had trained previously at this gym that I was also employed at, or am employed at currently. And Justin came into the gym to kind of start his fitness journey, for lack of a better phrase. And the first day he was in there, or the second day or whatever, was very early on. He and I kind of started talking, and it was an environment that was, I don't want to say not friendly, because everybody in the gym for the most part is very easygoing and super cool to get along with. But most people don't go out of their way to have full-fledged conversations with you. And being someone who is a competitor, the gym is a means to competition. So you're kind of in there for a reason and a job, not necessarily to socialize. So I respect that people take it seriously. But Justin and I kind of, attracted, positive vibes, I guess, because we were both very conversational, and we had some pretty good dialogue on that first day. And it was like, Justin, I don't know how long it was, but you and I talked in that turf room for what seemed like forever.
It did. It felt like a long time, didn't it?
And like Shannon, likewise with you and I, at the Redcon booth, I feel like if you are a positive person, I don't know if it's, I don't know the intricacies of it, but there's definitely some type of, whether it's, the energy that you produce, but there is some method of attraction to where people are attracted to you and things happen to you. Like whatever energy you put in the universe, that energy returns to you. And I feel like it happens tenfold with positive energy. So when negative things happen, the negativity gets attracted to you and negative people. But when you're positive, not only does that attract positive people, but I feel like you can also influence negative people as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So go ahead, Justin.
I had one thing to touch on that. So it's weird. Like whenever I was not so positive, in the last 30 years, my circle was always really, really small. My mom, my wife, my brother, maybe a couple friends.
Yeah.
But other than that, I didn't have a big, vast circle that I would really consider friends. But the more that I promote myself as positive, and I know I can do this, I know I'm doing this, like, that positivity, I've made serious relationship connections with people that I didn't even know existed. I didn't even know that the amount of people like Charlie or yourself that are, genuinely caring and nice people, I didn't even know about, because I was so negative in my own self. So it's like that outward being positive about yourself and your own environment can help you create relationships that you need to be better.
And I think you saw that firsthand, Justin, just the other day, how Justin had kind of gone, I guess he just kind of disappeared off social media for a few days.
That was today.
No, there was that today that he reached out to. Yeah. Kind of tell that story briefly, because that was, I think,
so me and Charlie and I have a friend at the gym who we lift with when the gym was open. We lifted with every day, and I have a group of people that I inadvertently send Snapchats to or tag them on Instagram or Facebook all the time. And over the last few days, I just have kind of went dark on the social media. It wasn't that there's anything wrong, so to speak. I just haven't been. I've been busy. I've been, with this cold front moving through Ohio, I've had to cover my garden, and I've just been busy, working a lot, and haven't messaged anybody. And this morning, I was sitting at breakfast with my wife, and we were sitting there just kind of talking, and Trevor sent me a message out of the blue, out of nowhere. Says, "Hey man, you all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." He's like, "Well, I haven't heard from you in a couple of days, and I just wanted to make sure you're good." And I was like, "Man, that's really cool. I'm solid." He's like, "If you need anything, let me know." I'm paraphrasing, but I'm like, this is what it's about right here. Making these relationships. This is what I told him. I said, making these relationships with people that care, that
Yep.
genuinely care about somebody else. This is what I'm doing this for.
Yes.
Because if everybody were to reach out to one person that they didn't think that to one person every day, we would have less mental health issues in this country, in this world.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely something we're going to touch on here, the mental health aspect in a little bit. One final thing that I wanted to discuss with you, Shannon, because Justin and I spoke earlier about how we preemptively knew this was going to take 2 episodes. So I think that
Yep.
the logical way to do it, as far as like structuring the 2 episodes, would be one to focus on what would be, I guess, looked at as the downfall and all the kind of negative things that you or that you experienced. And then the next episode can be the overcoming portion. And then we'll delve into a lot more detail about what you do now and how you turned into a professional athlete and a business owner and an RN. But before we get to that point, can you now, so you get out of the residential unit,
Yep.
more or less in an estimation, you overcame an eating disorder as much as you could have overcome it at that point in time.
Yes.
You get out of a abusive relationship, and
Mhm.
now you're going on to college. And then once you get to college, how does life look at that point?
Life was great. I started college. I started my nursing classes. I was so excited that I was going to be able to make this life and have this career that I always wanted and that I always thought I would have. I was living off campus, actually, in an apartment with my boyfriend at the time. Well, yes, my boyfriend at the time. Um, I completed my first semester. I was almost done with my first year. I had gotten engaged to my boyfriend, so he was now my fiance. And then I found out at about the time I was done with my first year of school, I found out that I was pregnant.
So you're 19 at the time, then 18?
I was I was about to turn 19.
Okay. Gotcha. So then, you think that you're finally out of the woods. And I don't want to say that this is a negative, because eventually it
Right.
turns into one of the most positive things that you could ever experience, and
Yes.
a purpose of why you're alive.
Yep.
But going into it initially, it looks like a negative. So then, did you
Oh
ever
yeah.
find yourself regressing back to like, oh my gosh, I just keep like, was there ever a point in time where you kind of had like self-loathing, and like you were like feeling sorry for yourself, like, why does this keep happening to me? First I have these issues with my eating, and then I'm in an abusive relationship. Now I'm 18 years old and I'm pregnant while I'm trying to go to school. Was there ever a point where you started questioning why all these things were happening to you?
I honestly don't think I ever was questioning why all of these things happened to me. I'm not a self-loathing person. I'm not someone who typically feels sorry for themselves, because I feel like there's always someone out there who has it worse, number one. Um, and number two, I feel like I felt like a failure more than anything else. I felt like I was disappointing my parents again, when I found out I was pregnant. Here I am, almost 19. I'm pregnant. I don't have a career. I was terrified to tell my parents. I thought for sure my dad in particular. I was devastated. I thought my family was going to hate me, and I felt like a failure. But the way I've always kind of tried to look at life and any obstacle that I had in life was, okay, maybe right now it is terrible. Maybe right now I don't know why this is happening, or I don't know exactly how I'm going to deal with it. But I feel like I try and look at any situation that happens in my life, whether it's good or bad, as what am I going to learn from this? And how am I going to move forward to make myself better or make the situation better, or just I feel like there's always something to learn. And I've, I've been through a lot, and I wouldn't change any of it, even if I could, because it's made me who I am today. And I'm very thankful for that. And that's just how I've always kind of viewed it. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a self loathing person. I'm not someone who will sit back and wonder why all this is happening or poor me. I'm going to get back up, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to deal with it, and I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to become better for it.
I think that that
Nice.
raises a very, very important point. Perhaps arguably the most important part of all of this is looking at a situation that you're given, because let's be realistic here. Um, you know, Shannon, you were dealt some pretty bad hands in the game of life. And
Yeah.
you absolutely looked at them with the correct mentality of, okay, this is what I have. These are the cards that I have to play, and I have to overcome this. There's no other option.
Hmm.
This is what it is. It's almost like a very matter of fact approach to tough situations. Like, this is what it is, and this is what I got to do to get over it or get through it
Right.
or thrive with it.
Right. And it's not that, you don't have days where you're down or you're negative or you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? I'm not trying to say I'm constantly positive or I always have this amazing outlook on life, because everybody has their bad days. But I've just always been that person who I do believe everything happens for a reason, even if you can't see it at the time because it's a bad situation. I think you just need to look at, all right, this is bad right now, but how am I going to make it better? How am I going to learn from this and make my life better or become a better person? And, when I found out I was pregnant, as much as I felt like a failure, I knew that for that situation, especially, my life was no longer about me. My life was about this other person. And I had no choice. I had to do what I had to do to give this other life the best possible life I could. I couldn't sit back and quit or give up because I had this little person who was going to be depending on me.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's something that I've always asked parents. And I've always said, not having children of my own, I've always asked, okay, so when you are pregnant and you know that you or your significant other is having a child, what changes do you have to make mentally to go into fatherhood or motherhood, knowing, okay, I'm in charge of a human life? And every single person has said exactly what you said, that
Hmm.
it wasn't a difficult transition at all, because it happens very, very innately, where it's just a sudden, like, okay, I am in charge of this human, and this person's life supersedes mine immediately.
Yes. And I think especially for women, I think it takes maybe a little bit longer to become a reality for the dads, simply because, not that they don't transition, but I don't think they transition like the woman does
Well, there's no
right away.
biological
Because
connection too.
Right, because we're carrying that child. We feel it, we know it's there. We know it's growing inside of us. We can feel it move all the time. It's something we're very conscious of. Whereas for the dad, I don't think it truly becomes reality until the baby's born. And now I think it really becomes a reality for the father is, oh my God, I have this life now. Like, this is my child that I created. And is it, I think it does just happen, like you said, very innately. I think it's something that just happens.
And so, I speak for Justin and I foremost when I say that we are super grateful for you coming on and sharing all this with us. And I think that this is probably a pretty good time, at least in your story, to transition off a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
because this will be a nice splitting time, because up until this point, your life has been filled again. I very, very cautiously throw the pregnancy in there because it was a little bit inconvenient, but it's definitely not a negative.
Right.
But you had all these negative things that happened in your life up until this point. So then I think next time we have you on, we can focus on the positives. And before we kind of close up shop here, we talked about mentally overcoming things and the mental aspect of how you need to approach failures and how you need to approach setbacks. And that kind of
Mhm.
opens up the bigger picture of just mental health in general. And
Mhm.
this is something that I know, Shannon, you yourself are very in touch with. And Justin, I mean, you have opened up on previous episodes about some of your mental health struggles. And, Justin and I have both kind of provided a platform for people to reach out and say, like, hey, if anybody out there is having any issues and they need someone to talk to, it's really important to do so. One of the reasons we bring this up, unfortunately, it's very painful to talk about, and it's still just very new and fresh, is the three of us are all affiliated with Redcon One, all tier
Mhm.
operators who are ambassadors for the supplement company. And one of our athletes, Luke Sando, at 30 years old, passed away um, this weekend. And it was extremely tragic, to say the least. I don't know of any other adjectives that we could string together that would possibly do justice of how unfortunate it was. And
Mhm.
it has kind of been a calling to most of the fitness community, especially the bodybuilding and competitive community, to reach out to everybody and kind of paint the broader picture of, this is bigger than a sport, and mental health is something that you see people across all. I mean, it doesn't discriminate. Like, all ages and races um, have to deal with it at some point in time. And I think that Justin and I, if I pat ourselves on the back, at least for something, I'd say we've provided a little bit of positivity and a platform where people can reach out. And I know, Justin, this is definitely something that you and I have spoke about in the past, and it's an issue that's very near and dear to your heart for several reasons.
Absolutely. It's so important to talk to people and to think about people's feelings. And I'm not a huge feeling guy. I try to be tough and on the exterior, but really think about people and the way they react to what you say. And also, if you know somebody who is going through something, you know, reach out to them. Don't wait for them to reach out to you, because sometimes it's too late.
Mhm.
Sometimes if you all they all sometimes all it takes is that one phone call to say, "Hey, how you doing? Do you need something?"
Yep.
I used to be weird about telling guys I love you, man. But a simple "I'm proud of you," or "I love you, buddy," something like that, or if you need something, call me. That kind of stuff really goes a long way. So that's kind of the nature of the story here. Is if you need something, if you think somebody that needs something, speak up. And then if you're somebody who needs something, and you feel like you can make the call, the suicide prevention hotline is always there. There's always people on the other end that care and that are willing to talk to you if it's free and it's anonymous. You know, that's an avenue that we all have. So, I guess that's a good spot for the number is 1-800-273-8255. Um, if you know somebody that needs something, that's a good place to start.
And I'll kind of piggyback off that and say I have no qualms whatsoever about giving my information out for those of you that, if I could be someone that may be able to serve as, just if nothing else, a set of ears. So if you reach out to me on social media, like, I'll listen. And because I've kind of been in an instance where I've needed some guidance and needed some mentorship and some help with things, and realistically there are times when it doesn't even matter who it is. Sometimes you just need
Mhm.
someone to talk to. I know that the three of us can probably attest to how therapeutic it is just having a conversation with someone, and how relaxing, and just like getting the proverbial weight off your chest, so to speak. So please don't hesitate to reach out to people if you're going through stuff. And like Justin said, just being a genuinely caring person, even if you don't think someone is going through something. Like, I challenge someone to, if you're listening to this, reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in a while. I try to make an effort to do that with specifically with all of my former players and athletes that I've coached, because, doing this for over half a decade now, I've coached so many boys and girls, now turned men and women, that I don't want to say you ever lose track of them, because you certainly remember them all. But sometimes, they go in different life directions. So I always try to make an effort to reach out to like some of my former athletes, just to tell them I love them and I care about them and I'm thinking about them. And those are the kind of relationships that will last a lifetime. So just make an effort to strengthen some relationship that you have today, because you never know when it's needed or how you may affect someone, for sure.
And I wanted to say, I was going to say the exact same thing to anyone who's listening. First off, I want you to know that I know you probably, if you are going through something, you might feel like you're alone, but you're not alone. So many people have either had that same feeling or have it currently. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me either for absolutely anything, whether it's just to listen, to ask me any question, to pick my brain. I am here to help anybody who needs it, and absolutely don't ever hesitate to reach out to me for anything.
Now, Shannon, we're going to do this at the end of the second episode, which is kind of like our official closing. But since we're going on a week hiatus till we get you on next week for the part 2 of this interview, would you mind plugging your social media for people that may want to reach out to you or may find you as a beneficial resource? Maybe they're going through some stuff and they want your insights.
Absolutely. My Instagram account is at @sknorr, so SKNORR. You can also find me on Facebook if you wanted to there, under Shannon Knorr. And absolutely feel free to reach out to me, like I said, for absolutely anything, whether it's a listening ear, whether it's because you're going through something, whether it's because you even just have a question for me about anything that I've talked about thus far. 100% reach out to me and I will absolutely get back to you. And I'm more than happy to help you in any way that I can.
Great.
Yes.
So like I said, we are super grateful to have you on. Excited for interview part 2 for the come up of Shannon.
Yes.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to
I
the
got
end. Oh, go ahead, Justin. I'm sorry.
yeah, I got one more thing. It popped in my head and I thought about it. I was like, this is a good spot to drop one of Charlie's famous quotes. I'm going to quote our first guest, Johnny McComas, when he said, "I'm proud of you."
Yes.
That goes to all of our listeners,
Mhm.
everybody, first time, if you've listened every single time, I'm proud of you for being a good person.
And sometimes that's all it takes, is little words like that go a long way.
Mhm.
All right. So with that, we have come to the end of another episode. This has been the Chasing Dreams podcast, episode 25, for Charlie, Justin, and Shannon. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next week.